even in China, for example, China's more technologically advanced than the United States, I'd argue. So
No,
maybe
it's
it's a good
not.
example.
They steal all
Well,
of our intellectual property. They can't develop things. And I mean, that's a core strength of what capitalism or free market does. Because when you're in a socialist or communist society, you're not incentivized to build the best things. So, people aren't going to.
I think if you compare our major cities to China's major cities, it becomes clear which way of life is more advanced technologically in general. Which way of life involves the use of technology in more sophisticated and complex ways. But that's probably not a point we can agree on because it depends on investigating externally. But even if we were to play the devil's advocate, we can agree that China is much more technologically advanced than North Korea. But even then, the way technology is used is compatible with people's social values and communal values. It's compatible with their family values, right? It doesn't tear apart and destroy and alienate and commodify everything about people's lives.
All right. So, two things quick, though. So, one example I could definitely point to with China is the fact that they can't develop the semiconductors that are essential for things like AI or quantum computing or advanced missiles. They could only develop the semiconductors that are used for things like microwaves and basic things like that. So that's why they're so worried about South Korea, and that's why we put the chip sanctions on them, because we know that they can't develop their own stuff with in that regard. And that's an example of they have they have to rely on our intellectual property to build those things. And then go ahead with that, and then I'll do the second part.
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm a little confused because if China can't develop their own chips, why do we sanction them? If they can't do it, then we don't have to have a reason to sanction them. We could just allow the chips to continue to be manufactured in the Taiwan province and not have to worry about it developing in the mainland. Well, the truth is, China can develop its own chips. It just hasn't been doing that because for the longest time it's been well integrated in the US led global economic system, and it's taken for granted those supply chains. Because of the aggressive economic policies against China by the US government, China is beginning actually to become more self reliant when it comes to the development of chip technologies. And it's making pretty swift and steady progress in that regard. I mean, just recently, Huawei released a smartphone that is totally made in China. The chip is totally developed in China. Now, have they gotten to the 6 nanometer? I think that's what it is.
Or
Point
five,
yet?
yeah, 5 nanometer or whatever.
They haven't yet, but they're getting there. They've just started only recently, and it's not something that can be done overnight.
No,
So
massive
I would,
undertaking.
yeah, but I would highly contest the idea that they can't do it. I mean, if the Taiwan province can make chips and manufacture chips, so can the mainland, which has much more resources and manpower and capital. It's just going to take some time. It's not going to be overnight.
Yeah, but I mean, point to something like that. Point to something like the fact that they only have one what is it, aircraft carrier when we have 20 of them. They can't build that.
Again, I don't think they can't build it. I think it's a matter of priorities. Is it really? Well, I mean, what would you prefer? Would you prefer having the best world class infrastructure in the world or 20 aircraft carriers? I think I would prefer having the best class, world class infrastructure that allows me to go from, Detroit to San Francisco in, a few hours by high speed rail, rather than having the means to police and control the entire world, which, by the way, we can't even do necessarily because of how economically costly it is at the level of having to occupy countries. So I think China, it's not a matter of whether they can or can't do these things. It's what are their priorities. They
But,
spend a lot more in their economy and they invest much more in their actual needs of their people than they do on their military.
so why'd
And
they
I
build an
don't,
extra billion units of housing that's not being occupied right now? And then they have like buildings that are falling apart. They have these entire ghost cities. So how is that a bigger priority than building out their navy, which they've spent a ton of money on their navy over the last few years, which I know. So they're up to something with that. Why not build an aircraft carrier when that's one of the most essential things of a navy? Like they have a really short range navy right now, and I don't imagine that's something
right,
they're
because
happy with.
China doesn't have designs on the whole world. They just want to defend their own shores. They want to defend their own waters. But to answer the question about ghost cities and so on, it's actually a common myth. And in terms of Western analysis of China, these cities are empty because they build the cities first, and then they build them entirely, and they plan these cities from scratch, and then later on people move in for job opportunities, and this can actually take years.
But
So you'll see cities for a period of time being empty, but that's not because they're going to be empty forever. It's just because the process of their city building, that's another topic, by the way, we should get into, takes time. When's the last time we've built a city in the United States? They're building cities, every year. We have not built a new city. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, forget build a new city. When's the last time we've built a major city even?
I mean, we're developed. I mean, I see apartment buildings going up across the entire country, and any city I've been in, I've been across the country a few times,
Right.
and I
But
think we're just building on the existing ones. But no, but that's a fact though that multiple sources have proven and given strong evidence for. That there's literally enough empty units to house the entire population a second time.
But building apartment units and planning entire cities with all the infrastructure and amenities that come with that from scratch is a much different undertaking from the perspective of scale.
But
And
they're
we
doing it.
can't
Oh god.
and we can't do that. We don't have the ability to do it.
No, but they're doing it in a way just to stimulate the economy. Like the vast majority of their economic growth is based off spending on real estate that's not going to be used because it's impossible to use it when literally the amount of units available is equal to the entire population.
I think that many speculators looking at China, not financial speculators, but commentators, think that China is always on the brink of collapse because the investment that they put into their latest city or their latest infrastructure, it's never going to be paid off because it's never going to be used. And then a few years later, what do we see? It is getting used. It does get paid off. It just takes time.
Well, I would say it is on the brink of collapse just because of its demographics alone, which again, going back to government planning, the government screwed themselves up with the one-child policy. I mean, I think China would have been a potential contender to be the next reserve currency, but there's no shot in hell they're going to be that now with their population problem.
The population problem is a very long-term issue. It's not an immediate issue, I don't think, in my opinion.
That's why deflation's happening right now in China, because they don't have enough consumers in the younger group. And, when you get older, you stop being a net consumer.
I'm not exactly sure. I would have to investigate more the problem of the source of deflation in China myself. I won't comment on it because I would probably need to read up more on it. But what I could say is that all I can tell you is that the prediction that China is on the brink of collapse has been happening since the reform and opening up in the 1980s, especially picked up steam in the 1990s after China rejected the Soros-backed color revolutions that took over the rest of Eastern Europe and the rest of the communist countries. So since the 1990s, we've been predicting the imminent collapse of China, and it just hasn't happened. You go to any year, any given year, since the beginning of the internet itself, and you will find many articles by mainstream news media of people predicting the imminent economic collapse of China, and it simply has not happened.
Well, they remind me a lot of what happened with Japan. I mean, you remember how Japan was the talk of the town in the 80s, 90s. They were growing rapidly, and a lot of it was because of real estate debt. And then, what happened? They increased rates a bit, and the economy couldn't handle it, and it came cascading down, and it just decimated the spirit of Japan. And their population's literally been flat for the last 20, 30 years, and their stock market, I believe, just hit the all-time high that it made in the 90s. So I think that's the direction that China's heading in, personally.
Yeah, in my opinion, I disagree because Japan never had its own reliable and strong economic hinterlands. It never had its own strong base of demand to continue propelling economic activity.
And that's exactly the problem, I think, with China.
Yeah, but China is so much bigger than Japan, geographically and in terms of the population. And then plus, Japan never had a Belt and Road Initiative. Japan never spearheaded this kind of new sovereign-based world economic system, which China is hoping is going to ameliorate that problem by tapping into new markets through win-win economic cooperation. So Japan never had the ability or the capacity to defy the United States and basically try building a totally new world economic system to save its economy. It never had the ability to do that because Japan's economy was built by who? By us, right? Bretton Woods policymakers and planners are the ones who propped up Japan and built Japan's economy. They had the Marshall Plan. They didn't. They're not like China where they industrialized from scratch and where they basically set up their own sovereign economic system.
Well, we enabled China to get rich. So, I mean, in the 70s, that was kind of the trade off we made when we got off the gold standard. We're like, all right, if it's going to get too expensive to build shit here, we're going to make China our personal factory. And that, it helped China get rich, helped us keep prices down, and it helped them massively industrialize. And then we put them in the World Trade Organization in the 90s, and then, got even faster from there.
I agree that China saved the global economic system led by the United States because that was collapsing in the 70s. And we needed China much more than they needed us. China would be fine continuing to just grow rice for another 100 years, probably.
Yeah, they were in the Stone Ages, though, back then. I mean, they wouldn't even be in the top 10 of GDP if we didn't do what we did with them. But yes,
what they had is political sovereignty, so they could do that for however long they needed to. It was us who depended on the need for the economic system we have to constantly be fueled. And that was what was collapsing in the 1970s. So China actually rescued the world economy, not just once, but twice, actually, because in 2008, that was the second time where the almost overwhelmingly majority of global economic growth after 2008 was led by China.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that part's true. I agree with that.